Hello, everyone, and welcome to our January Training Tuesday event for OU Campus. Today's topic is components inside and out. We're going to go further in depth about how components work and how to take complex HTML and turn it into a functioning component for your site. During the presentation, all participants will be in a listen-only mode as the session is being recorded. If you have a question during the presentation, please use the Q&A function found at the bottom of your screen. We will attempt to address your questions during the presentation. After the formal presentation has ended, we will review and answer all remaining questions. Your presenter today is Brian Laird, Web Developer Manager. Brian, I will hand it over to you.
All right, thank you. So yeah, welcome to this month's Training Tuesday. I am Brian Laird. I'm a Web Developer Manager in Professional Services. I'm going to go into components. So a little bit about what we want to go over today in our agenda. We want to talk about what a component really is. What does it look like? We want to talk about when should you use a component, and then how do we actually do it? And then we'll go ahead and have a demo so we can get a little hands-on, followed by Q&A. So jumping right in, looking at a component, this is the little symbol that you'll see in your toolbar that signifies what you are looking at is a component, or that you're going to insert a component. And a component is our newest type of reusable content. So we already have like assets and snippets and other reusable content in OU Campus. A component is a newest way that allows you to reuse your structure and your styling, but your content remains unique per page. So it has a form-based entry. So it uses different form fields and allows you to prompt the user for the content that will be on the page. So therefore, it can all be customized. And then once you do that, that content is specific to the page, while the component output structure still remains the same. When you make changes to the component's base code, it does reflect across all pages that have that component on it. So if you did add new fields to a component, the existing instances of that component would not yet have those inputs for those fields until you go in and edit the component and add them in. So just keep that in mind if you're going to change existing components, or if you want to change the type of value that you allow for a component. Just remember that once you do change the component itself and you launch it, it will affect all the components that are already being used, instances of that component that are being used. So being a piece of reusable content, it's good to know when you should use your component versus when you should use like a snippet or an asset. So some good examples of what you could use a component for is if you have some unique content and it has reusable structure or styling on it that you want to be able to give that user the ability to edit that content without messing up the structure. Typically, it's really useful for more, I'm going to call complex HTML structures. And by that, I mean just content that's maybe not quite as easy to edit in the WYSIWYG editor with the basic elements that you have there, or it has some more elements that you kind of want to lock down. So some examples of different kinds of components that you might want to create would be something like an image with a caption, maybe some kind of a card on the page. You could have some kind of a flexible video element and so on. On the other hand, we do have assets. So assets you also will use for that kind of shared structure and that shared styling, but in an asset, the content is. So if you make an asset that is for a department contact box, you put that contact information in the asset, and wherever you place that on the page, it is going to exist as the same static content on every page you place it. Again, you'll be able to edit that asset, and it would affect all the pages that subscribe to it. In the component, you can edit the component structure, but again, that content that you specify can be individual per page. So there's a couple examples of what you could use assets for, like an enrollment number, a department contact box. That content that is going to be exactly the same across multiple pages. You could also, as far as reusable content goes, you might want to use a snippet. Snippets are good for if you want to have that initial content and that structure styling is shared again initially, but then once you insert it on the page, it becomes unique and can be changed by the users. So this is also good if you want to have table transformations. You can use snippets and supplement it with XSL to be able to generate some of those more complex HTML structures. That allows you to have more things like the repeatable elements in a row with different content on each and so on. So there's some examples of what you might want to do for snippets. You could have maybe just a simple table, but you want to have preset styles on that table so that the user doesn't have to just create a table in the system and then go in to edit the table properties. They could insert a snippet in there. You don't really need a component to do that unless you really want to lock down that table structure and not make it editable at all. Again, table transformations with repeatable elements like accordions or tabs are a good example of when you might want to use a snippet because components really, at this point, do not have any repeatable elements, though you could give a number of, a set number of elements that you could do in conjunction with maybe some XSL to transform it. But there's some examples just to give you a little bit of an idea of the differences. So components are really a wonderful, great feature that we've come up with here. They have a lot of use, but there's still definitely good use for the other reusable content. So I definitely encourage any of you when you're using these different elements to make sure that you understand what it is that you want to edit, how you want to edit it with your workflow so you can choose the most appropriate use case of the editing experience that you want to give your users. So let's go ahead and dive in, and just as an overview, this is how you would create a component. So the first thing you want to do is you got to figure out what code do you want to use for your component. So you got to figure out what is that code and then make sure that it actually works in your design. Just like any other code, I don't want to just pull it off of some website, stick it on my site and assume it's going to work. Normally I would test it first, just statically on a page, make sure it's going to fit. And then once it looks good, then you can figure out how you want to split it out and what editing experience you want. So the first thing is just make sure you have that desired code output that does conform with your design. Then we go into the component, you create a new component, and you can just copy that output into the component source. So the component source is just a field in the components where you can paste your source of what your component will output, along with assign it with the different form elements. I like to put my code output in first so I know what I'm working with, but you don't necessarily have to do this in this order. You could also do the form elements first, and these are the different editable pieces that you want to give your users. So if you want to allow the user to enter in a text field or select from a drop-down, give them a WYSIWYG editor, whatever it is for a chunk of content that you want them to edit within the component source that will be output by the component, that's where you would create the different form elements. Again, this step and copying from the component source can be interchanged in either case, but I'll go into that as well. Usually I do a lot of switching back and forth when I'm doing this, because once you've created your form elements and you have your component source, then it gets a little fun because you get to actually specify where do you want to put your inputs in your component. So if I created a heading field that was just a text box for the user to enter in, I can then specify in my component source where that form element will actually be output in the source code. Once you've specified where all those go and you've got your output set and you know where the users are going to edit content within that output from the source, then it's just a matter of making sure that you set your component properties. So you have the proper access settings and so on for who's going to be able to use the component. And then you want to make sure you launch the component. And by launching the component, that makes it available to be used by the users that are within the access group that you've set to be able to edit it and use it on your pages. And at that point, you just go ahead and start using the component. Really fun. So let's go ahead and dive in and see what this looks like, because I think it's a lot nicer going hands-on. So let's take a look. So here I have a OU campus, and this is Galena University. I've just created a new page in here. I just called it Components. And if I look at it, you can see this is just a basic empty page here. So my goal here, what I really want to do is I want to add some components to this page. And so, as I mentioned before, the first thing I really want to do is figure out, okay, what code do I want to put on here? And it could be anything. In this Training Tuesday, I'm going to show you examples of all sorts of different code that you can put inside of your pages as a component that don't require any supplemental code. You can do, as you may have seen last month, you can put in components that have XSL behind them that transform them and do even more complex things. That is also possible, but this here is just to give you an idea of what you can do with a basic component without needing anything else. So let's go ahead and start with something pretty simple. I'm going to create a little video box here on this page. And so first thing I want to do is I'm going to grab my code. And I could, if I want to, even, I can copy my source code, which I can take from somewhere. And I'm going to go into my main content editable region here, make it a little bigger so if anybody can't see. And let's say if I want to do just this Vimeo thing here. So if I save that, I can preview it. I can look, yep, this looks pretty good on my page. Maybe I want to turn that component and allow the users to be able to edit this in the WYSIWYG without potentially messing with that div structure. Because right now, if I go in here, I can edit this, and it's going to give me this piece here. This one's pretty safe, but you could have any kind of a div structure. Maybe you have some custom different pieces that you can't just use this insert edit video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and create a component to be able to do this, so that all I have to do is enter in the ID of this video, and then it's going to do it for me. Again, you could do this with any div structure that you really want to put here. This is just a simple example. So the first thing I want to do is I want to actually go create my component now. So I'm going to go to Content and Components, and I'm actually going to go ahead and open this in a new window. And I'm going to go up here and hit the green button for New to create a new component. So the first thing you need to do when you create a new component is give it a name. So I'm just going to call this Flex Video. So I'll go ahead and hit Create here. And you can see I'm now in my component interface. So here you can see I've been dropped into the form elements here. So if I know what elements that I want to put on my output of my source, I could start creating these here. Or if I want to, I could just click over to source right now and paste in my source initially, and then get that information from my source. So I'm going to go ahead and paste what I just pasted into my page here as my source here. So again, it's a very simple div right now. It's got some specific classes on it. This could be maybe a card or something else. And then I look here and say, okay, what do I want to have that would be editable for my page? And in this case, I'm just going to worry about this ID number of the video. I don't really want, in my scenario here, the user to edit and change any of this. So I'm just going to make them able to edit this one piece here. So that's fine. I'll just go and create a form element for it here. So I click over to Form Elements. And I've got to look for that number. Is there anything that seems to work for me here that would make sense? I'm probably not going to give them a radio button to be able to enter a number, so I'll just go ahead and do this short text. So I can drag this over here to create my form element, or I could just click on it, double click there, and the same thing would pop up and do it for me. So a couple different ways to do things. I always like knowing the different ways to be able to do things, because for what works for me, somebody else may like it a different way. But when I do a text element in my form, I have to give it a label. This is a required field. So I'm just going to call this, video ID number. I can give some optional helper text, which would appear underneath the element when the user is prompted. I could give some placeholder text, which would give it some text that would appear before I start typing in the video. I'll go ahead and enter a helper text in here and say, enter a Vimeo ID number to display a video. And you can see this is what it'll look like if I have helper text. And maybe I can even get an example of what a number would look like, something like that. That'd be really cool if that was my video number. And then I can decide, is this required or not? In this case, since it's the only thing in my video and in my component, it seems kind of important. I'm going to go ahead and make this required. And I could even look and see what the minimum length for one of these is. Give it some kind of a length so they make sure that there's a little bit of verification, validation on this element before the user goes. If I wanted to, I could even use a regular expression here to further validate and make sure I'm getting what I need. So that, say, if I only wanted to be digits or something like that. But this will be good enough for our little simple example here. Let me go ahead and save this form element. And you can see that it exists now in my component. If I go back into my source, you can now see my form element appears here in my list on the left as well. So I can now take this form element and allow the user, once they enter it in here, to inject it to any spot in my code here. So if I just wanted the number to appear after my div, I could go here and I could just drag that in there and it would appear. That's probably not a good spot for it. Probably better to use this number right here. Little cool trick with the components, if you highlight something, I don't actually have to delete this first. I could just click on this form element here, and it will actually replace that text as well. So that's kind of a nice little shortcut that I enjoy. And so in this case now, whatever ID number that I use, that I enter into my element when I'm on a page, it's just going to inject it here, and it's going to surround it with the rest of this particular structure. So kind of a very simple idea, just one little piece that needs to be adjusted there. I can also, let me go ahead and save this. Once I've done this, I can go into properties, and if I want to, I can actually change the name of the component. I could tag it to make it easier to find in my list, just like you could with like assets or whatever. And I can actually limit this to different sites. So if I just want any site in the account to be able to use this component, I can just hit yes, or I can limit to different sites like you do with other elements in OU Campus as well. So that might look a little familiar to you. I'm just going to go ahead and say this is available account-wide. And I can change the access group. So if I only want people in my news group to be able to use this component, I could do that. Or I could just limit this to administrators only, or I can leave it for everyone. We'll go ahead and let everyone put videos in here. And just like most any other page or elements in OU Campus, I can save a version of this. So it'll save a version in the versioning system, and you can look at the versions as I launch components or manually save the versions. You would see those here, just like you would on different pages in OU Campus. I can even do a preview of this, so you can see this is what the form is going to look like for what the user will get when they prompt it. And I can see here's what the output will look like as an example of what the source would look like. But to be able to use this on my site, I do need to launch it. So at this point, it's not visible to my users. So if I go in here and I can go into my WYSIWYG, I can insert component, and I just don't see anything here because it just does not exist yet. So what I need to do is I do need to launch this component, and then I'm going to go ahead and give it a description. First launch, I should type it correctly for you guys, of the video component, something like that. So once I've launched it, it tells me it's launched it. And then what I can do is go into my page, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out everything that's in this editable region here, since I did have that div in there before. And now if I go in and insert the component, you'll see it appears here. If I had tagged my component, you could actually filter by it as this list gets larger. But I'm just going to select my Flex Video component here and insert it on the page. It's going to prompt me for the component information that I set up in my form elements. In this case, I'm just going to put in a ID, and that's just the ID that I had before. If I hit save, you can now see this component is on the page. If I save this, you can now see the output from the component appearing here. So just an alternate way that you can give users something very easy to use there. So that's a very nice, simple use for a component. If you have some kind of a div and you want to preserve that whole structure, but only allow the user to edit that one little piece. In this case, you could use that video embed in the WYSIWYG, but this is a kind of an alternative way to do it with a component. I do see a question here in the Q&A that asks, do you know if there's an issue with assigning the output of a WYSIWYG editor to a variable in a JavaScript block? Everything I tried just broke my script. And I did want to point that out because if you look at, say, the output that you would get from Vimeo, it does have some elements, and if I go to the source here, like this, where they just will go like that, where it'll just be Mozilla full screen. And I added this little extra attribute in here because everything that you put in the component is going in the WYSIWYG editor, and it will be processed by the XSL engine. So when you process any code with the XSL engine, it means it needs to be XML compliant. And so most likely, if you're doing something in a JavaScript block, or you put some JavaScript or other kind of script that's in there, it probably will not be XML compliant. So just like if you are in the source code of a page and you're trying to put some special code in here in any spot, it needs to be XML compliant. So does your component source code. Otherwise, you will get an error on your page. I can actually say get rid of this really quick and highlight that by just saving some code. While it's valid HTML, it's no longer valid XML because this attribute does not have a value. So if I just launch this really quick, and then I go back and I preview my page, you'll see there's an error here that's giving me that. So this is likely the issue if you're trying to do something with a JavaScript or other kind of a piece there. I'm going to go ahead and fix this component because I like my components to work. So I'll go ahead and put that back in, save, launch, and I really should do a version description on each of these. So fixed XML compliance. So we'll launch that. And so now that my component code is fixed, it is here on the page. All right. So this allows you to, you've got to be careful, but this allows you to have kind of that easy editing experience there for your users. So when you have a component here, just make sure that, your component code is XML compliant. And if you have something that's more complex, you could potentially use XSL to process it to output something, that's not necessarily easy to edit inside of a component source individually. And that's where, if you watch actually this video right here that I happen to point to, can give you some examples of, when you change table transformation snippets, which are already being processed with XSL, how you could actually transform those into components as well. But it does have a lot of power there. So this is really nice. It's kind of a very basic, simple example. There are some other things like in the WYSIWYG, if I was to edit this, and let's say if, let's go ahead and kind of give myself a new starting spot here and just go underneath my component. If I look at this, I could type in, some text because I'm imaginative. I'll just type what I'm saying. And I could, make this a red bold text or whatever. If I change this into, say, a link, and I give it, some link or whatever here, I may also use the styles dropdown to apply something to my link. So, another class to the link here. And this applies to the anchor tag, the A tag on there, if you look at the source of this. So let me just save this. And so you have a lot of possibilities just by utilizing the styles dropdown, where you could actually apply these classes to the anchor text here. But let's say if you wanted to enforce a certain set that is only for buttons, and you don't want it to be able to be applied in other places or something in the WYSIWYG editor, but just used for your component, we could create a simple code that's very similar to this, say for a button, that could be used on the page. So let's go ahead and look at that really quick, what that kind of a component might look like. So if we go ahead and go back into components, and again, we can go to content components. Since I was already in the components here, I just clicked the breadcrumb, and that's how I got back here. If I hit new, I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, and I'm just going to create a simple colored button. So we'll go ahead and create that. And in this case, the source code that I'm going to do is just going to be an anchor tag with a class on it. So in the source, this is what I'm going to look for here in this particular component. And now as I look at this, I have to decide what I want to allow the user to edit here. So in this case, maybe I want them to edit where it's going to link to. Maybe I can allow them to edit the button text, and I could even allow them to change the button class, but maybe I want to have that a little bit more locked down to certain colors. So that's what I'm going to do on this particular component here. So for my form elements, again, I can kind of go back and forth and say, okay, what do I need? And first thing I'm looking at, here's the button text. So I can go back in the form elements, and that again, I think I can just use a short text field. So I'm just going to call it button text. You can give it some helper text, maybe enter the button text here, something useful for users. You can say if it's going to be required, again, adding validation to it or not. It's up to you depending on your use case. And then I'm going to go ahead and save this. And I also need now to have a link. So looking at my form elements, again, I just kind of swap back and forth. I find it easier for reference. And in here, for a link, I want to make sure that they do the correct paths. So I'm going to use a file chooser here. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag that down there and create a link. So maybe that's just the link URL. Choose a file to link to, something like that. Again, if I want to make this required, I should make it yes. It's up to me. I can show you what it looks like if it's not valid, but I probably would make this required in most cases. But if you don't want to have it validated, it just would be no, it wouldn't give you that red box. And again, if you want to, I have some advanced elements on this form element as well. So if I want to say where I'm dropped to initially when I start, when I click the button here, when I'm filling out the form, if I want to be dropped into a particular location, I can set that here just by choosing a folder here. I can set the available file types that be available by typing that in here. So if I only want to link to, if this was an image, if I only wanted to let it be JPEGs or whatever, you could put that in there. If it's locked to path, that means that you can't escape the folder that you set as a starting location. And you can also see if you're going to look on staging or production for the files that you're linking to as you're browsing through the system. I'm not really going to worry about this one on this link. I'm going to leave it pretty open to whatever people want to do, but so you are aware those are available options here. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and create this. And then the third thing that I needed on my source here is that class for the button, because we do want to be able to change that and lock that down. So all the elements that I've done here have been kind of more loose. With the file chooser, you can really choose anything you want. With short text, you can type in whatever you want. I'm going to make it a little bit more locked down for the class that I can put in there. So I'm going to make this a drop down. And I'm just going to say, call this button color. So maybe the users who are going to input this do not know what kind of HTML or any of that kind of stuff. We just want to make it very simple for them. So instead of calling this a button class, I'm just going to call it the button color. And you know, choose a color for this button. And let's go ahead and sure we can make this one required. And I'm just going to enter in some items here. So maybe I want to do the default color. I can just leave that. And then I just hit add, and it adds in different colors. And maybe I want red. I could make it maybe green, make it blue. And so now I've got some colors here. For those who are more HTML inclined, which you kind of want to be at least to some level to be able to do the component source, if I click advanced, you'll see here the values that I put in as are the display name here in this first column. This value here is what will actually be output to the component source. So in this case, I'm just going to put in the class that I want to have there. So I'm going to say button here. And in this case, I'm going to have it button, but I'm going to go ahead and add a little CSS styling into my pages so that it can pick it up. And so I have one that I called red button. And I want this all to be buttons, so I'm just going to keep that button class in there. There's a green button and a blue button. Oops. Very important to type that correctly. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. So now I've got my form elements. If I go back to source, just like we did before, I'm just going to insert those form elements into my form where I want them to be. So here I want to put my link, put my button class in there, which I called button color. And then my button text will be right there. So once I do that, I just hit save. And you can see this is the form that our user is going to have. If maybe I want them to choose the button color first and this order is not exactly what I want, I can actually go back to my form elements and I can just drag and drop and rearrange these. If I hit save, you can see now this is what my form is going to look like for my user. So that's a nice little way to be able to, you know, just figure out what elements you want, and then you can worry about rearranging them later if you want to kind of organize this a little bit nicer. I do recommend, you know, try to do some kind of a logical pattern that makes sense for your users. Once I've got this, again, if I want to, you know, limit this to anything here, maybe I'll tag this one as Training Tuesday and, you know, just limit it to, you know, a couple different sites here. I could save that. I could also limit the group maybe on this one. So this one, I only want, you know, this site group here to use that component. I can limit that, save it all, and then once I launch it again, then it's available for my users to be able to put them on the page. As long as they fit within those permissions, the access settings that I just set in the properties. So I'll go ahead and launch this guy. So created simple colored button component. So launch that. So at this point, I can now go in and add this to the page. But what you'll see as soon as I do is that this component does not have all the CSS for the coloring in there. So let me go ahead and delete this guy. And I'm going to insert component again right here. If I want to filter by tags, you can see how that works there. Pretty simple, like any other time you see this kind of a view in OU Campus. If I click on the simple colored button one, which is one I created, and insert it, again, choose my color. I'll just go ahead and leave it default for now. call it my button, and then I can link it somewhere. I could link this externally if I wanted it to, but let's say we link it to the Campus Life Index page. Hit save, and so now I have this on my page. If I hit save, you can see, yay, I see a great color here, a different button. It's the default color, it's exactly what I wanted to see. But maybe I thought, oh, I wanted this to be green. So I can go into my component, I click on the component, I get this little pencil so I can edit the existing component. Again, I can look at it here. If I change this to green, and I hit save, at this point, it won't actually change it because I haven't added that CSS into my page. So I can output all this stuff in these options, but again, you want to make sure that the component output source is going to render as you want in your page ahead of time. So if I look and actually inspect this, you can see that it did add that class in there that I expected to my element that I was outputting. So it did what I thought it was going to do. It's just I don't have a class in my CSS that's working on this, that's going to apply on this. So in order to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to Pages. And in my resources, I'm just going to go to my CSS for this particular site. And I have some styles that I have here for this button that I can use. And let's make them look a little prettier. So these are just going to do some colors for this particular button when I use it. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, publish it. Because it is CSS and OU Campus, it does need to be out on production so you can see the difference on your page. Now, if I go back to my page, components here, I will have to do a hard refresh here. So it's using the right code. There you go. And you can see the green button here. So a lot of times when you're doing the component and you're working on it, you'll see that you can do all this output, but if you're adding something new, it may require some additional CSS or code that needs to support it. So you do want to ensure that that code is on your page. If it's not like CSS, maybe it's a JavaScript or something that you want to dynamically put on the page only if the component's there, then that lends itself to more of a complex component that would use XSL to detect if the component's on the page by targeting, say, a particular node, and then it could output that JavaScript dynamically. So we won't be going over any of that kind of a stuff in this Training Tuesday, but I do want you to be made aware that that is possible. It just requires that extra level of effort to now add an XSL processing of your component output. But now once I have my CSS in there, for my button, I can now go in and have all sorts of fun and just changing different colors here. Maybe I want to make it blue, and now it's a blue button here. So pretty simple, not too hard to be able to do that. And I find it very useful to be able to do these kinds of things where you really want to limit the users instead of the styles drop down. You may not want to be able to apply that button class to any element. If you put it in a component, that's a way to further kind of refine and limit what the user could do for a button specifically in this kind of a case. And you also can do that drop-down type of view, limit the number of options for the user and really kind of lock down what that output's going to look like while still giving the users the flexibility of dropping it anywhere on their pages. So it kind of gives you that really the best of both worlds when it fits in this kind of a situation here. All right. So I do have one other component that I do want to show. It's a little bit more complex here. And actually, if you have some structured data. Yes.
Before we jump into the next topic, there are a few questions that need to be answered. So the first one is from Patty Bradley, and she asks, what is the best way to help my users remember whether something is a component, snippet, or asset?
Yeah, that's a good question because as we were talking about, you do have all those different pieces that are available for you. So if you want to look, there's different kinds of ways that you could look at this. So if you are editing a page, and this is what I think the question is really getting down to, and you want to insert a new element, and the question is, how do I help them remember if I need to pull from a component, snippet, or asset? A lot of it is just really make sure you have your resources available for the users. You have good training materials, but you can also look at the component here. You can look at the list. I think making use of the tags can be useful for types within the component or snippets or assets. But I think a lot of it is just making sure that you've trained your users well and you have it very well organized as well. If a user knows also a little bit of the differences of, a asset's going to be the same on every single page, then, whatever that element that they want to edit, if they know it's not changing and it's going to be the exact same text no matter what page they put it on, then it's more likely an asset. And sometimes if worst comes to worst, you just need to go and, look at the snippet list and just kind of explore. You can always just look at the snippets. You can look at the assets. You can look at the component list very quickly, do those filters. That's a very nice way to get things as well. But I'd say the best answer is just to be as organized as you can and make sure that your users do have that basic information and understanding of how they work. And if you have a guide that you want to put out that lists all those in a one location as kind of a resource guide for users, you could do that as well, that you could print or have available on some page that would be useful for users as well. All right, there is, just looking at a couple other questions here. Joe D'Agostino, hopefully I don't butcher your name, sorry if I do, says, would you recommend we create a components.xsl file to house our potential component transformations in one dedicated file, or is there another best practice we should follow for component transformations? I really do like the idea of using the components.xsl file. Just like if you see a standard implementation that we do, in professional services, we will often implement something and have table transformations, snippets be in a snippets XSL. So if you have your components in a components XSL, it makes it very easy to know where your component transformations are coming from when you are going to do additional processing on it. So yeah, I do recommend the components XSL file. I think that's probably the best practice you could use there at this point. If anybody does come up with, good, awesome ways to be able to organize that they think is better, we're always love to hear what you guys are doing as well. And, if there's, we have the feedback form or the OCN, or, just let us know if you have something that you think would be better, and we're happy to pass on those good techniques as well. But what we found is definitely components XSL file is very useful for the code that you're going to transform your components with. Keeps it separated from your main implementation code and very easy to find if you need to edit it or add a new one. And then I also see Raja Mendadala ask, can we use any other language than HTML like Python for coding? So for component code, you would want to make sure that it is XML compliant, whatever you're putting in there. So most likely it's going to be HTML type code. If you're going to use, some kind of a server-side language, if you want to use Python or PHP or C# or something like that, then you probably want to use, some other, mechanism that's going to dynamically call that. So we've done something where you might want to put the call to a PHP include in an asset, or maybe in the component, if you want to do an advanced component, you could have a node in your component instead of HTML that your XSL can then transform. So let me just highlight that really quick here. It's definitely a more complex piece, but I'll just call it complex component, so you can see what that might look like. So in your source, you know, maybe this is, you know, some kind of a, you know, parser component. I don't know, kind of making this up. But you could have something like that. And then you could say, you know, if you're parsing something, maybe you want the feed URL, and this could be an element, you know, that's, you know, theupdate.com/ you know, feed, something like that. And maybe you can allow the user to choose where the feed is, you know, number of items, something like that. You can have 5 in it or whatever. You could then have the XSL take something like this, do a template match on, say, this parser component, and the user in the component could choose, you know, whatever elements that you have here, and then you would have your XSL call that server-side script. So that would be probably the best way to do that. And that way you can still use things like Python or whatever that you want to have for your coding, but you could kind of mix it a little bit with a component by giving what the user can edit here, and then with the XSL transformation, call your script. And I see one other question here. It says, can you next components and snippets? I'm assuming it means nest. And so when you look at a component source code here, they output as this kind of a long pill here. So it has a lot of data here that is kind of specific to this page. So if you wanted to, yeah, technically you could put any code you want in a snippet, but I wouldn't recommend doing that because it is kind of specific to the page that you're putting it on. And I'm not entirely sure the consequences that could come out as, you know, as the code with, you know, kind of these IDs, if that would work or whatever. So I would recommend just having the component itself, you know, being used independently is going to be the least amount of potential confusion, and make sure you're not going to necessarily have issues with that. You can potentially, with like a complex component, you could create a snippet and then intend for, say, a table transformation snippet. When you're inside the table, that it could say, you know, insert this type of component inside of the snippet to be able to kind of do a mix, a hybrid type of a solution there. That could be done. And in that way, that kind of a nesting, I think, would make more sense for when you're using a component there.
Yes, as far as I understand, you can't insert a component into the source code of a snippet. However, once a snippet is placed on a page and there's an appropriate space for it, you can add a component via the WYSIWYG editor into the component, into the snippet code, because at that point it's just coding on the page like anything else.
Yes. All right. And then the other question just popped in is, how does it look if you inline components within text? So let's say if I just go ahead and do that really quick, we can see, but it'll just insert the component in there. So, so let's say this is some text with a component within it. So part of it, I didn't mean to hit Alt. Part of it will depend on the type of component output that you're putting here. But let's just say if I go right here and now I insert the component, let's say we insert our button. And we'll make it red. Red button. And we'll just link it nowhere. The example here. So first thing you'll see is it'll look like this. It'll have, you know, whatever text that you have is just going to be surrounded with it. You see the component pill right here. When I hit save, it's just going to try to render that code within the HTML that it was put into. So there we go. So in this case, you can see it just injected the code from the red button in there. If I inspect this, you can see this a little clearly. you can see here's that anchor. And since all it was an anchor inside a paragraph, it's not really going to be a problem. However, if I was to put this whole div inside of this, what'll happen is this div would essentially go like this, and you would have a div inside of this paragraph tag, which it'll render depending on how it is, and you could potentially, have some issues if you use the wrong type of component output in a spot where it's not expected. So you do want to make sure you're careful about that. But kind of a couple examples of what that would look like, and it really depends on the text that you're putting it within, what that HTML structure looks like, as well as the text of the component output itself, whatever that component is going to be. If it's a, that block structure like the div, it will do something more like this, where probably not as good of an idea, but if it's just an anchor tag, you're going to be okay doing something like that. All right, I don't see any other questions at the moment, so I'm going to do one last component here today. And just to kind of give you another example of what that looks like, didn't mean to go off my page. So I'm going to go ahead and just create kind of a structured contact box here. So let me go into my components here, create a new one, and I'm just going to call this contact info box. And let's say if you had something like this, it's more likely you might have something like this on your site that you don't want your users to mess with the WYSIWYG. And again, it's just a matter, once you have your sources, what do you want your users to edit? And so I can kind of see different pieces here. And so what you do is you just kind of go and, again, choose the form elements that make the most sense. So looking here, I see here's a name. So I could split this up into first name, last name, but I'm just going to say, name, enter a full name here, something like that. And maybe I don't care about any other validation or anything else on that. I just hit save. As I'm building the form elements, I can actually put them on the page at the same time as I'm switching back and forth. I also use the name here as the image alt text, so I'm just going to use that twice. Here it looks like we need some kind of the person's title. So if I go back to form elements, that seems like another good text field. So title, enter the title for this person, something like that. And again, you can do validation if you want to. And then I can go back, I could highlight this in here, and I can put in the title. For an image, I could put in this path to this image here inside of a form element. So again, I could just go in and say, okay, what makes sense to put in for an image path? Maybe do I could do an image chooser here, which could do it, or maybe I just want to do a file chooser. You can, pick whatever makes the most sense. But let's just go ahead and say choosing this, and I'll say, image, because I'm really imaginative sometimes. Again, with the file chooser like that, the image chooser also has these same options of you can, set something to starting locations. Maybe I want to dump you into resources images initially. So I can save that. And then I can put that in here and say, okay, there's my image that I want to put in there. If I want to now, let's say here's an email that I see here. And again, this one's repeated. So there is a form element that actually uses an email, so it automatically will validate for an email. Before I actually go to the email, I do see a question related to the image here. So with the image, it does not actually ask for the alt tag. So if it's not a decorative image and you want to have that, the recommendation that I would have is to create a text field like I have with the title here, and just make sure it's required. So that way it does get entered in, assuming the image is also required. All right, so with the email, again, you have an email element right here. so if I insert that, this is going to automatically validate for an email for me. So I'm just going to call email and email address. And I don't know if I want it required, so I'll just say no. And then I can go in and say, here's the email, and I'll just put in that email field. Same thing with this email field here. So since it's going to use the same information, I can just put it there. If I wanted to, maybe I'd want to, just put the title there that's linked. It doesn't have to be email here, just with this example there. And I do see a couple of questions related to what we're talking about here. So the first one is, what's the difference between the image chooser and the file chooser? So the image chooser is going to limit you to selecting images, and the file chooser allow you to choose, any file that you want. It could be a page or a folder or whatever. And the image chooser is a little bit more strict on that. The email, speaking of just one other question that I see there is their example of regex. The email kind of has built-in regex, but let's say if we wanted the phone number to be validated, because this is a good example of a regex. Let's say if I want to do a phone number field, and let's do a regex on that. So let's just say it's a text field, and we'll call it phone number. And let's even say it's required, why not? If you want to apply a regex on this, we do want it to be advanced, and we say validate with regular expression. We're going to say yes. And then you enter in the regex right here. So for a phone number, maybe I want, if you're not familiar with regex, don't worry about this. Maybe I want it to be, 3 digits first. And then in this case, it'll be a dot, but since dot is special in regex, I will escape it. And then I'll say 3 more digits. And then again, dot. So I'm saying this phone number has to use the dot expression. And then we want to finish with digits. So let's say we want to finish with 4 digits. Or we could even say 4 or more if you have something that's a little bit longer. And maybe you have a phone number that also can, it's not necessarily digits. It could have something else. You could change this regex, but I'm just going to say digits only. And then you give it an error message, please enter a valid phone number, something like that. And so then I've got all my phone number stuff there. I could even do minimum length, but I think my regex will take care of that. So I'll hit save. I'll insert this phone number into my component. And I could do office hours and stuff too here, but just to highlight this, I'm actually just going to save and launch this component right now. First launch of component. I'll go ahead and insert that on my page over here. Give myself a little space so we can just see this a little easier. When I insert this component, I'm going to insert my contact box here. And so we have the different pieces. So, John Doe, professor of maybe archaeology. Choose an image. You can see it drop me into the image folder that I chose. I can go within it. Maybe this is a person, so that can be John Doe. Email address, you can see it's not a valid email yet, so maybe it's jdoe@Galena University. And then you can see the phone number. So if I'm trying to put something in, it's not matching my regex, but if I put in something that matched what I did, then you can see now it's not giving me an error because the regex has been, it's met the conditions of my regex. So I hit save on that. And I have, my image is not terminated by a closing tag. So if you recall, I said it had to be XML compliant. And so if I go to my source here, you can look at my image does not actually have a closing tag. So if you are copying something from another site or something like that, again, make sure it's XML compliant. Okay, so closed image tag. launch that. And now I should be able to see a simple output here. If you want to add some styling to this that would go with this particular output, you can do that as well. But what you can see is within my WYSIWYG editor, I have this complex div structure that I didn't have to do anything but just put it in the component, insert my fields, validate them as I needed to, and so on. So that's how you would kind of do that piece there. I see a couple questions here. And so the first one says, when you enter available types for the images, for instance, do you write .jpeg, .png, or just JPEG PNG? Do you need dots and commas? I'm not 100% sure on that, but I can double check, and we could probably do a quick test on that. Yeah, if you can stick around a little farther, we'll do a little test and see which one you need to do here. So if let's see, this one has an image in it. Yeah, okay. So let me go ahead and go to my image chooser, and let's just say JPEG and C. So save that, launch that, and let's see what it lets me do. So I'll go down into the component that I edited here, and I'll choose my image. This one's a JPEG. Do I have any images that aren't JPEGs? No, I have all JPEGs. Well, I'll see if it works for one thing. It validated there, so it seems like that's okay without the dots and commas there. So just be, you should be able to put it in that way. All right. Other question there was, can you have XSL conditionals within the HTML of the component? For example, only show email label if the email field isn't blank. So the XSL, I haven't tried putting it inside the component. I don't know if, you know, that probably would not be recommended, even if it was possible. What I would do with the component is I would kind of like that example component that I did with the complex one, is create the different elements that you have for the component and use XSL to validate, you know, maybe if the length is 0, or be able to just see if you have it in there to conditionally output based off of that. Yeah, I wouldn't try putting XSL into the component source here. And then other question that I see here is, can you quickly show us how to use the WYSIWYG element? And yeah, you can, with the WYSIWYG element, we could even say put it in here. It would be the same way that you do any of these other elements. So I will create a WYSIWYG editor. And, you know, I can, you know, content region, something like that. You can put in helper text like you on other pieces. You can make it required or not. If I save it, add it, let's say, let's make the office hours a WYSIWYG. So then I'll go ahead and insert my WYSIWYG in there. Hit save. And it's just going to, as I look here, you're going to put whatever output from the WYSIWYG that you get will be in this content region. So I'll save this, launch, added WYSIWYG element. Okay, so this has been launched. I'll go back into my component here. Oh, let me, I think I need to refresh here. Hold on. Because I did change the component structure that time. There we go. So now you can see here's a WYSIWYG editor here, and you know, Tuesday to Thursday, you know, 9 to 3 p.m., something like that. And you hit save. And so whatever you have in your WYSIWYG is going to go right there. So just as simple as any of these form elements that you have on your component. Whatever is entered in there, it just gets output to the source at the particular location that you specify. All right, so that concludes everything that I wanted to show for this particular Training Tuesday on components. So, next month we're going to have another Training Tuesday on covering the topic of XSL 3.0. It'll be on March 26th. So if you want to keep up on any additional details, there's some information on the OCN and the support at omniupdate.com website. We can give you more details there. Thank you for your participation.
Yes, thank you, everybody. If there are any last questions, this is the time to get them in. A recording of this will be available on the support site by the end of the day. Brian, will any of the code you demonstrated today be available for download as well?
Yes.
Okay. So yes, we will also have sample code that you can use to duplicate these components. And also, if anyone is interested in I would say an extension of the session or getting more in depth about components, our conference, our yearly training conference, is coming up in mid-April, and I really recommend signing up for the conference and signing up for the workshops on components, including one that Brian is going to be leading about components. So outc19.com, again, outc19.com. Check it out, register. There's early bird-ish pricing still available, but it runs out pretty soon. And all right, I'm not seeing any more questions coming in. So with that, I would like to thank everybody from attending. Don't forget to fill out the feedback survey. We love hearing from you guys, and it helps us tailor our Training Tuesdays to what you want to see. Thank you, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.